All right, today we are digging into something truly wild. It's a bold proposal to reboot an entire country's future, and it all starts in the classroom. The big idea? A new renaissance powered by science, philosophy, and art.
So let's just start with that massive question. How on earth do you reboot an entire nation's education system? I'm not talking about small tweaks here and there. I mean a complete tear down and rebuild from the ground up.
Well, a fascinating new report out of Tunisia from an author named Brahim Salem puts a pretty radical answer on the table. And it's a vision so big, it's really calling for nothing less than a new renaissance for the whole country.
Okay, so before we get into the solution, we've got to understand the problem they're trying to solve. Let's dive into the why. Why is such a huge change even on the table in the first place? The report doesn't mince words. It paints a picture of a system at a critical turning point, arguing that right now it's just not getting students ready for the modern world. You can feel the urgency here. The stakes are incredibly high. So the report really breaks down the root of the problem. It points to things like old colonial structures that are still hanging around, which has led to a curriculum that's kind of stuck in debates about the past. The report calls this a cognitive bottleneck. Basically, it's arguing that students are being taught to look backward at identity politics instead of looking forward, which just crushes the kind of critical thinking you need for innovation. In this slide right here, this really captures the whole argument in a nutshell. The suggestion is that the system's focus has been totally inward, caught up in these narratives of the past. The proposed change is huge. Stop focusing on identity politics and reorient everything toward competing in a global knowledge-based economy.
Okay, so now that we've seen the problem, what's the big solution? This is where we get to the core of the report's vision, something it calls the Renaissance Triad. The first pillar of this new educational foundation is science. And we're not just talking about another subject in school, but as a fundamental way of thinking that's crucial for competing on the world stage. Next up, the second pillar, philosophy. The idea here is to build a solid foundation of rational thought and ethical reasoning right from the very beginning. And the third pillar that ties it all together is art. So, there you have it. Science, philosophy, and art. Not as separate boxes you check off, but as one integrated, powerful whole. And here's the key takeaway. This isn't just about training people for jobs. The Renaissance Triad is a much bigger, more holistic vision. The real goal is to cultivate a complete individual. Someone who's analytical, but also rational, creative, and emotionally intelligent. It's about building innovative citizens, not just cogs in a machine. All right, so a big vision is great, but how do you actually make it happen? Let's get into the nitty-gritty and see how this vision gets translated into actual, concrete policies. First up, science. And this comes with a huge, game-changing shift. Teach it all in English. The thinking here is pretty simple. English is the language of global science, of tech, of innovation. If you want to be a part of that conversation, you've got to be fluent. And, this isn't just some wild idea they dreamed up. The report actually points to real-world success stories. You've got Estonia, which has become a STEM powerhouse after embracing English and coding. Or look at Taiwan's absolute dominance in the semiconductor industry. These are proven models. Now for philosophy. And this isn't about making kids memorize Plato quotes. No, this is about changing how they learn. So you move away from just memorizing facts and you move toward classrooms filled with Socratic debates. The whole point is to shift students from just passively taking in information to actively questioning and reasoning for themselves, starting when they're super young. Now, for the third pillar, art, the PERN is actually pretty brilliant and practical. It calls for the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Culture to team up. I mean, why build a bunch of new buildings when you can use existing cultural centers, theaters, and clubs as classrooms? This makes art, music, and dance a real accessible part of everyone's education. Okay, now you've got to hear this because it's truly radical. To make any of this work, the report says society has to start valuing teachers and doctors as the most important professions. And how do you show that? Simple. You give them the highest salaries in the entire public sector, full stop. And the plan doesn't stop there. It's a whole package deal. It calls for modernizing how history is taught using AI and multimedia, moving religious education to mosques on Fridays to create a clearer line between faith and state schooling, and even adding martial arts for discipline and ethics. It also suggests creating different paths after school based on a student's actual talents, not social pressure. So, when you put all of these pieces together, what's the end game? What does the future of the nation actually look like if this massive blueprint were to succeed? This is it. The ultimate goal is to literally transform the national identity itself, to move away from an identity defined by the arguments of the past and toward a future as a vibrant, dynamic hub of knowledge, innovation, and creativity that can compete on the world stage. So let's just quickly recap the core pillars of this incredible plan. You've got science, in English, to be globally competitive. You have philosophy from day one to create citizens who can think rationally. You've got art and culture to spark creativity and emotional intelligence. And it's all built on a foundation where teachers and doctors are valued above all else. Which, of course, leaves us with one final massive question. This whole blueprint is an amazing vision for how education could totally reshape a nation's destiny. But can a curriculum, no matter how well it's designed, actually create a new renaissance? That's a pretty big thought to leave you with.